NBA. Joining me now on the Boardwalk Honda hotline, Julian Edlow. He is DraftKings NBA contributor. Joining me on the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Julian, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. How about you?
Doing well. So, just to kind of cap off the NBA as a big picture, I just want to get your reaction. What is your maybe your biggest surprise, your biggest takeaway from the NBA season as a whole so far?
Biggest takeaway from the season so far is probably where the Cavaliers sit at third in the Eastern Conference. Not necessarily that they are below the Celtics and Raptors, because those are a couple of quality teams that we could see challenging the Cavs in the Eastern Conference Final. But I think the perception at the beginning of the season was that it was just going to be another runaway season of Golden State and Cleveland, and that nobody was going to be able to change that. And the Cavaliers obviously had to completely rehaul their team at the trade deadline. And then another little sneaky headline is just how much, Houston has become a challenge to Golden State in the West. Yes, Golden State still an obvious favorite there, but Houston's making some noise that you really can't deny, and that's going to be an awesome Western Conference Final, assuming that we get that.
Sticking with the Cavs for a moment, I feel like the Cavs are a team that they needed to make the trades they did before the deadline to get Clarkson and Nance and Hill and Hood, because they needed that youth revitalization. But it really feels like without Kevin Love, they just don't have a bona fide number two next to LeBron, because there's been games where all those supporting actors for LeBron James's big show, they're not coming up when he needs them most.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. The Cavaliers needed to get younger, more athletic, better defensively at the trade deadline, and they did all that. So I was a fan of what they did at the trade deadline. But people forget this team, got almost run off the floor in 5 games in the NBA Finals, and that was with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love on the floor. So Kyrie Irving obviously now gone in Boston. Cleveland has turned that into the draft pick, obviously, is going to be valuable most likely, but in terms of what they have on the floor right now, they didn't get that much from the Kyrie Irving trade in terms of contribution. And Kevin Love obviously just waiting to come back from that broken hand injury. So getting that second option back on this team, you would think, is really going to help Cleveland come playoff time.
The Eastern Conference, one of the teams we talk a lot here on 97.3 ESPN is the Sixers, because they're right here in our backyard. It's interesting because a lot of people focus on Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, but I think to me it's the fact that the team around those two guys complement them is one of the things that make the Sixers such a viable team for the playoffs. Yeah, two guys can be a bad matchup, but if the rest of the team is also doing their job as well, it makes the team even more dangerous.
Yeah, well, I know I'm here in Boston, and the Celtics have one of the best young cores in the NBA, but I absolutely trust the process. I am loving what I see in Philly. They've won 8 out of their last 10 games. Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons get the headlines, and rightfully so, but you guys are building a really nice young core over there. You've got your guys like Dario Saric, and just building very well around those guys, and who knows what kind of draft pick might be coming down the pipe with that Lakers pick, if it does go to Philly. So this year, in terms of the playoffs, yes, they have a really solid team. They can certainly find themselves in the second round. I don't know if I see them necessarily making the Eastern Conference Final this season, but they're going to be a tough out in the postseason right now. And in terms of down the line, it only gets more scary.
You cover a lot for DraftKings with the daily fantasy sports. What kind of numbers usually spit out for you when people ask you about, or you're analyzing the numbers for guys like Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid? What kind of numbers are you seeing that really stand out to you the most?
Yeah, I mean, they're both obviously terrific fantasy players just because they're both so well-rounded. In terms of the numbers for them, it really depends, just as it does for almost any play when you're playing DraftKings, whether it's NBA or any sport. You want to look at that player's salary, their matchup, and the opportunity that they're going to have on that evening. So Joel Embiid's been a guy who, at his best, can play at an MVP level. So he's peaked, around $11,000 in salary at times, and that's a really hard time to roster him, just because if you don't get an enormous night from him, he's not going to reach value for you. But recently on DraftKings, Joel Embiid took a little bit of a dip down to about $9,400. And that's the type of time that you want to pounce on a guy like him, just because, matchups count for something, but a guy like Embiid is almost matchup proof because there's nobody that can really shut him down and guard him with his inside-out game, his length, his rebounding ability, his shot blocking. So it's really with a guy like Embiid, when it comes down to his salary, pouncing on him at the right time.
What about Ben Simmons? What kind of value has he been generating? Because he's a guy who's a potential triple-double every night. I'm a guy who has Ben Simmons on my year-long fantasy basketball league team. I drafted him, and let me tell you something. I'm pretty happy with him because he's the guy that is more than just the points. He's getting the rebounds, he's getting assists, and he's also getting the defensive numbers as well.
Yeah, so something that's really nice about Simmons is, for example, if you're playing cash games on DraftKings, which means rather than trying to hit it big in a tournament with a scaled payout structure, you're just trying to finish in the top half of the field maybe to double up your money. A guy like Simmons comes with a really high floor if he has a bad game because he does so much. So you mentioned the triple-doubles. A triple-double would be great, but let's say it's a night where Simmons only scores 6, 7, 8 points. But you know that maybe you're going to get 11 rebounds, 13 assists. That's going to add up for you. That keeps that high floor for him, and you know that you're not going to get a complete off night even if he's not shooting the ball well.
We're talking with Julian Edlow. You can follow him on Twitter at Julian Edlow. He is NBA contributor for DraftKings. We mentioned the Celtics earlier. I know you've been up there covering them a lot. Now, I'm asking you because you're there. What is the thing about that team that has stood out to you the most this year? Because to me as an outsider, there's two things. One, I think Kyrie Irving should be an MVP candidate. And two, I think Brad Stevens should be a Coach of the Year candidate because Brad Stevens has done another amazing job with that team, and Kyrie has really embraced the opportunity to not just be the star on a team, but to carry the team many times.
Yeah, well, I certainly agree with you on both of those points. The way that James Harden's playing right now, the MVP award, I would say, is his to lose. And Anthony Davis is really making some noise with the Pelicans since DeMarcus Cousins has gone down. But Kyrie Irving has to be in that MVP, on that MVP list somewhere below them, just with the way that he's playing. The thing that stood out to me about this team so far this year is that they have been pretty streaky. They opened up the year 0-2, and then they ripped off a 16-game win streak, but they go into the All-Star break having lost 9 of 15 games, and now they're 4-0 since the All-Star break with a huge matchup in Houston tonight against the Rockets. So I just want to see them maybe, despite the fact that they're second in the East with 44 wins right now, I want to see them maybe settle down a little bit more, get a little bit more consistency come playoff time, because teams like the Raptors and Cavs are obviously going to be tough outs. And then who knows, maybe you wind up with a team like the Sixers or the Bucks and you're going up against Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons or the Greek Freak in the first round. That's a tough matchup. Not that I don't like the Celtics there, but they're going to need to be playing their best basketball.
It's interesting because the two top teams in the East right now, the Raptors and the Celtics, the Raptors have one of the best home records in the NBA at 25-5, but the Celtics have one of the best road records in the NBA at 21-8. So you're talking about two teams that it's almost like their strengths are almost opposite of each other, where the Raptors are so dominant at home, but the Celtics, it seems like they can just walk into anybody's house and win on any given night.
Yeah, the 21-8 on the road is obviously very impressive by the Celtics, and that has to give you confidence come playoff time when you know to go on a run you're going to have to come up with big road wins at some point in time. But just to look at the opposite side of that for a second, you mentioned the Raptors 25-5 at home. The Celtics are 23-11 at home. Usually a very good home team, so they're going to have to, obviously they're going to be a team with home court for at least a round, probably 2 rounds in the playoffs. They're going to need to figure out a way to protect their home court, somewhere that they're generally very good, especially in the playoffs, to make sure that they get the most out of this playoff run.
Let's flip it over to the Western Conference. You mentioned the Rockets. I still feel like the Rockets are a bit of a fool's gold because we saw them wilt a bit in the playoffs last year. I know the team's a little bit different this year, but Mike D'Antoni is still the coach, and D'Antoni has showed that he's so hyper-dependent on the players who are on his team, not as much on his ability to make his team better each and every time. Does James Harden and Chris Paul make up for if the rest of that Rockets team is shooting cold?
Yeah, it's a good point on D'Antoni. How many times did we see that Suns team in the mid-2000s be either the top seed in the West or one of the top seeds in the West, and the Lakers or the Spurs or the Trailblazers, whoever was hot at that time, would wind up getting by them just because they would let up so many points defensively. Their studs wouldn't be able to carry them through a postseason series against, a team with equal talent. And obviously Golden State has more talent than Houston. Houston just barely ahead of Golden State in the standings right now by percentage points. Can Chris Paul and James Harden carry this team to a playoff win when the rest of the team isn't going? They certainly should be able to. Your stars are going to carry you to wins in the playoffs. That's how it works in the NBA. But I'm glad that you mentioned that Houston playoff run last year, because the last time we saw James Harden on the floor in the playoffs, he scored like 7 or 9 points in a blowout loss to the Spurs, who were resting their stars in a playoff game in Houston, and the Rockets just got mopped. So that's a really tough game to get out of your mind when you're saying that's the last performance the Rockets showed me in the postseason.
What are your thoughts on the Thunder? Because I think the Thunder, they got 3 stars on their team who I think that 3 stars with the firepower those guys can have if they're on can really give the Warriors some trouble. And they've beaten the Warriors 2 out of 3 times already this year. If the Thunder and Warriors match up in the playoffs, could that be a series that goes 7 games?
For sure. Outside of Houston, and we need to see a little more from Houston, I guess, in the playoffs. The Thunder are the type of team that are built to compete with Golden State and Houston, for that matter, just because they have the studs. They have a guy like Steven Adams who's going to get in there, get physical, defend, rebound, be the tough guy for them, and let those scorers score. And Russell Westbrook and Paul George, I think, have had some of the best chemistry in the NBA together this season in their first year together. So OKC, for some reason, they can't completely put it together in the regular season. Only 37-27, 5th seed in the West right now. But obviously, when you have Russell Westbrook and then a guy like Paul George, you have the tools to beat any team in a series. So it's although it's unlikely, I would say, unless they kind of gel a little bit more and get some more wins this season, improve their record. They definitely are capable, obviously, from a skill perspective, of beating any team in the NBA.
Julian Edlow is NBA contributor for DraftKings. Julian, talk a little bit about DraftKings and what kind of value for DFS people are going to have for the month of March.
Yeah, so this is a really great time for DraftKings on for the NBA on DraftKings, rather. Sorry, NFL season is over. A lot of people are looking for a sport to do, and the NBA is headed into the playoffs. We kind of know which teams are in and out of it right now, so teams are tightening up their rotations. We know which players we're going to see on the floor. So every day, every slate is going to be different on DraftKings, and that's kind of the fun of it. And you're going to try and follow the news, follow rotations, and kind of see which players, like as I mentioned earlier, the 3 things are: what is that player's salary, what is that player's matchup, and what is their opportunity going to be on that given night. So, for example, last night we were trying to look for a way to get an edge on this slate as there weren't that many injuries. And right before lineups lock, Andrew Harrison and JaMychal Green are ruled out for the Memphis Grizzlies. Obviously, those are not big names. It doesn't sound like much. But Memphis doesn't have a very good team this year. So with Andrew Harrison and JaMychal Green out, Mario Chalmers and Jarrell Martin stepped into big roles. They were both really cheap players. Mario Chalmers, $3,500. Jarrell Martin was, I believe, in the 4,000 range, 4,500. And both of those guys scored over 26 DraftKings points, which is a very good. Basically, what you want to do in NBA DraftKings is you want to go for 5 times salary on a player. If a player costs $5,000, you're looking for 25 DraftKings points there to reach value. So when you get players like that going 6, 7 times value because of an opened up opportunity, it really helps you out there. And we at DraftKings try and help you guys figure out these plays. You can download the DK Live app, and we pump out this news all day. For example, when Harrison and Green are ruled out, you're going to get that alert, and then you're going to get some analysis on it and understand that guys like Chalmers and Jarrell Martin become really nice value plays on last night's slate, for example.
Julian, appreciate the time today joining us today on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. And just one more time, just plug DraftKings and plug your Twitter account.
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at Julian Edlow. You can find my articles Monday through Friday, daily fantasy basketball articles on the DraftKings playbook. I just mentioned the DK Live app has a lot of really good news and analysis to help you become a better player. And you can tune into our show, Pre-Lock Live, to help you with NBA lineups. And that airs Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 6 p.m. DraftKings usually tweets out a link, and you can find it on Facebook.
Julian, appreciate the time today.
Thanks for having me.